Martha Halstead believed her life was perfect. She had a devoted husband, James, 2 lovely daughters, and a home that radiated warmth. But one crisp autumn evening, everything fell apart. James confessed that he was leaving her for Claire Donovan, a colleague who had dazzled him with her ambition and charm. Claire wasn't just any other woman. She knew Martha, had dined at her table, and even smiled at her daughters. To Martha, the betrayal wasn't just an affair. It was a calculated destruction of her family. Claire's unapologetic demeanor when confronted only deepened the wound. "James deserves someone who truly inspires him," she had said with a smirk. James moved in with Claire, leaving Martha to pick up the shattered pieces. As months turned into years, the bitterness of betrayal etched itself into Martha's heart. She watched her daughters cry themselves to sleep, faced the whispers of neighbors, and struggled to build a new life. Meanwhile, Claire and James thrived, building a picture-perfect life that mocked Martha's misery. Martha did what she had to do. She moved on, or so it seemed. But deep inside, a single thought consumed her: revenge. Not in the heat of passion, but cold, calculated, and when the moment was right. 22 years passed. The daughters grew up, left Rosewood, and built lives of their own. James and Claire, now married, enjoyed the fruits of their success. Claire as a respected community leader, and James as a retired businessman. To anyone watching, Martha was simply a quiet woman who had made peace with the past. She volunteered at the local library, tended to her garden, and kept to herself. No one suspected the storm brewing beneath her calm exterior. When Claire announced her run for mayor, Martha saw her opportunity. She began by attending Claire's public events, always sitting in the back, unnoticed. She took notes on Claire's speeches, her habits, her vulnerabilities. It wasn't long before she uncovered Claire's secret, an affair with her campaign manager, a man half her age. Martha didn't confront Claire. Instead, she quietly gathered evidence, photos, emails, even recorded conversations. She waited until the week before the election, when Claire's victory seemed inevitable. Then she mailed the evidence to every major news outlet in the state. The scandal erupted like wildfire. Reporters camped outside Claire's house, and her name was splashed across headlines. Her campaign collapsed overnight. James left her, humiliated by yet another betrayal. Martha, watching it all unfold from her living room, finally allowed herself to smile. Revenge wasn't sweet, she thought. It was justice served cold, and after 22 years, it tasted perfect. Claire Donovan's world disintegrated in days. The scandal was merciless, dissecting every detail of her personal life. The affair wasn't just a betrayal of her marriage. It was seen as a betrayal of the community she claimed to champion. The media labeled her a hypocrite. Former supporters turned on her. Even her closest allies abandoned her in the chaos. James packed his belongings and left without a word, echoing the same indifference he'd shown Martha years ago. For Claire, it was the ultimate irony. The man she had stolen was now walking away, just as easily. But Claire wasn't the type to crumble quietly. She spent days trying to figure out who had orchestrated her downfall. The evidence against her was too well prepared to be coincidental. After sifting through the wreckage of her reputation, she found her answer: Martha. At first, Claire dismissed the idea. Martha? The quiet, forgettable woman she had wronged so long ago? It seemed impossible. But as she replayed the past, the subtle clues Martha had left behind began to make sense. Her presence at campaign events, her calm demeanor. Martha had been watching all along. Driven by fury, Claire decided to confront her. One rainy evening, she showed up at Martha's doorstep, drenched and trembling with rage. "You think you've won?" Claire spat, her voice sharp and trembling. You destroyed everything I built, but you're still the same pathetic woman I left behind. This doesn't change that." Martha opened the door wider, her expression calm and unreadable. She let Claire's words hang in the air before speaking, her voice measured and icy. "I didn't destroy you, Claire. You did that to yourself. All I did was shine a light on the truth." Claire stepped forward, her fists clenched. "You ruined my life." "And you ruined mine," Martha replied, her tone unflinching. "But unlike you, I waited. I planned. I made sure you'd feel every ounce of the pain you caused me and my family." Claire stared at her, her anger faltering in the face of Martha's quiet confidence. For the first time, she saw Martha not as the broken woman she'd once dismissed, but as someone far more dangerous, patient, and relentless. "I'll rebuild," Claire whispered, her voice hollow but defiant. "Go ahead," Martha said, stepping back into her house. "But you'll always remember who pulled the first thread." As the door closed, Claire stood alone on the porch, the rain soaking her to the bone. For the first time in her life, she felt the weight of consequences she couldn't escape. Inside, Martha returned to her armchair, her tea still warm on the table. She didn't feel triumphant, but she didn't feel remorse either. The storm outside mirrored the quiet storm within her, a lifetime of pain finally laid to rest. In the weeks that followed, Claire's life unraveled further. The scandal had robbed her of more than just her political aspirations. It left her isolated. The once admired woman was now a pariah. Her bank accounts dwindled as legal battles over breached campaign contracts and public lawsuits mounted. Even her affair partner vanished into the shadows, unwilling to shoulder the fallout. Martha watched from afar, not with glee, but with a quiet sense of finality. Revenge, she realized, was not the fulfilling act she had imagined for all those years. It had been a necessity, a way to balance the scales. Now that it was done, she felt neither emptiness nor joy, only peace. But peace, it seemed, wasn't something Claire was willing to grant her. One evening, as Martha returned home from the library, she noticed the faint scent of smoke in the air. Her heart quickened as she turned the corner to her street and saw flames licking the edges of her house. Firefighters were already on the scene, neighbors standing in clusters, their faces pale in the flickering glow. Martha stood frozen, watching as the fire consumed everything she had rebuilt over the years. A firefighter approached her, asking if she had been inside at the time. She shook her head, unable to speak. Later, as investigators sifted through the wreckage, it became clear the fire had been deliberate. Accelerants were found in the debris, and the arsonist had left behind a crude symbol spray-painted on the back fence, a broken heart. Martha knew exactly who was behind it. She confronted Claire the next day, marching up to the dingy motel where Claire had been staying since the scandal broke. Martha knocked hard on the door, her composure colder than ice. Claire opened it, her appearance disheveled and unrecognizable. Dark circles under her eyes, hair unkempt, and the sharp confidence that once defined her completely eroded. "You think I wouldn't know it was you?" Martha said without preamble, her voice low and steady. Claire smirked faintly, leaning against the doorframe. "Burning your house down. I'd call it poetic justice." "Justice?" Martha took a step forward, her eyes narrowing. "You've destroyed everything you've ever touched. My family, my home, your own life. And still, you think you're the victim?" Claire's smirk faltered, but she quickly replaced it with defiance. "You ruined me, Martha. What did you expect? That I'd just disappear quietly?" "I expected nothing from you," Martha replied, her voice laced with contempt. "Because that's all you've ever been. Nothing." The words hit harder than Martha intended. Claire's facade cracked, and for a brief moment, she looked like a shadow of the woman she once was, desperate, hollow, and utterly lost. "You think this is over?" Claire said, her voice trembling with rage. "I'll make sure you regret it. Just wait." Martha stepped back, a sudden calm settling over her. "You're wrong, Claire. It is over. For you." That evening, Martha made a call to an old acquaintance, a retired detective who owed her a favor. Within days, Claire was arrested for arson. The evidence Martha provided, security camera footage, witness statements, and traces of accelerant found on Claire's belongings, was airtight. The trial was swift, and Claire was sentenced to several years in prison. For the first time, she was forced to confront the consequences of her actions, stripped of the power and influence she once wielded so carelessly. Martha attended the sentencing, sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom. As Claire was led away in handcuffs, their eyes met for a fleeting moment. Claire's gaze was a mixture of hatred and defeat, while Martha's was steady, unyielding. When it was over, Martha walked out of the courthouse and into the sunlight. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 2 decades finally lift from her shoulders. She had fought her battle, not just against Claire, but against the bitterness that had threatened to consume her. For the first time in years, she felt free. Months turned into years, and the shadows of the past began to fade for Martha. After the fire, she rebuilt her home with the help of her daughters, who returned to Rosewood to support her. The new house stood as a symbol of resilience, brighter and more welcoming than the one before. Life returned to a quiet rhythm. Martha immersed herself in gardening and community projects, becoming a beloved figure in the town. Her name was no longer tied to the whispers of betrayal that had once followed her. People saw her as a survivor, someone who had endured and emerged stronger. But in the back of her mind, Martha knew Claire was still out there, serving her time, but never truly defeated. The thought lingered, not with fear, but as a reminder that some battles never truly end. One spring morning, Martha received an unexpected letter. The return address bore the name of the state penitentiary where Claire was incarcerated. She hesitated before opening it, her hands trembling slightly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting uneven, but unmistakably Claire's. Asterisk, asterisk, Martha. You won. I see that now. I thought I could destroy you, but in the end, I only destroyed myself. Sitting here, I've had nothing but time to think about the choices I made, the people I hurt. I can't change the past, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Not because I got caught, but because I finally understand the damage I caused. I don't expect forgiveness. I wouldn't give it if I were you. But maybe one day, we'll both find some peace. Claire asterisk. Asterisk. Martha read the letter twice, her emotions tangled. It wasn't the apology she had imagined all those years ago, raw, desperate, full of regret. Instead, it felt hollow, like Claire was reaching for something she couldn't quite grasp. She folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, unsure if she would ever respond. Forgiveness wasn't something she could give easily, not after everything Claire had done. But for the first time, Martha felt a strange sense of closure. Years later, when Martha's grandchildren played in the garden she had rebuilt, she often thought of the scars left behind by Claire's betrayal. They were part of her story, but they no longer defined her. As for Claire, the world moved on without her. When she was finally released, she returned to a life of obscurity. The once brilliant woman who had broken families and thrived on ambition was now just another forgotten name in a small town's history. Martha never reached out, and Claire never tried again. Some battles, Martha realized, didn't need a victor. They only needed to end. Years after the dust had settled, Martha lived a life of quiet contentment. Her garden, now a vibrant sanctuary, became her refuge. Each flower she planted felt like a small victory over the chaos of her past. Her daughters visited often, bringing their children, filling the house with laughter and warmth. The Halstead family was whole again, though in a different way than before. One crisp autumn evening, Martha sat on her porch, sipping tea as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air carried a chill that hinted at the coming winter. As she gazed out at the quiet street, a figure emerged from the shadows, walking slowly up her driveway. At first, her heart quickened in alarm, but as the figure stepped into the porch light, she recognized the gaunt, weathered face. It was Claire. Martha rose from her chair, her expression unreadable. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice firm but calm. Claire stood awkwardly at the bottom of the steps, clutching a worn coat around her. She looked smaller, thinner, as if the years had whittled her down to something frail. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Claire said, her voice soft and tired. I needed to see you. One last time." Martha crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. "Why?" Claire hesitated, her gaze dropping to the ground. "Because I needed to tell you, truly tell you, that I'm sorry. Not just for what I did to you, but for what I became. I ruined everything. For you, for James, for myself." Martha stared at her, her emotions a complicated mix of anger, pity, and something she couldn't quite name. She had imagined this moment countless times, but now that it was here, it felt empty, like a shadow of a long-forgotten war. "You think showing up here changes anything?" Martha asked, her tone cutting but not cruel. "You think saying sorry erases all the pain you caused?" Claire shook her head. "No, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I don't have anyone left, Martha. I thought if I could at least face you, I might find some small piece of closure." Silence hung between them. The world seemed to pause, the only sound, the distant rustle of leaves in the wind. Martha took a deep breath and stepped closer, her eyes steady on Claire's. "Closure isn't something I can give you. It's something you'll have to find for yourself, just like I did." Claire nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I understand," she whispered. "Thank you for letting me say it, at least." Martha stood there, watching as Claire turned and walked back down the driveway. She didn't call after her, didn't ask her to stay. Some doors, she knew, were meant to stay closed. As Claire disappeared into the night, Martha felt a strange sense of finality. The woman who had haunted her life for so long was now just a broken figure, retreating into darkness. Martha returned to her chair, the tea now cold in her cup. She looked out at the stars, their quiet brilliance undisturbed by the drama of human lives. For the first time in decades, she felt an unshakable sense of peace. The past was over, the wounds had healed, and in the silence of the night, Martha Halstead finally let it all go. Months passed after Claire's unexpected visit. Life in Rosewood returned to its steady, uneventful rhythm, but for Martha, the encounter lingered in her mind like a faint echo. She hadn't expected to feel anything for Claire, let alone the pang of pity that had crept into her heart. One snowy afternoon, as Martha sorted through old photographs in the attic, she came across a picture of her family from years ago. It was taken before the betrayal. James was smiling, her daughters clinging to his arms, and Martha herself stood beaming beside them. It was a snapshot of a life that no longer existed. Yet, as she looked at it, she didn't feel the bitterness she once did. Instead, she felt gratitude for the life she had now, a life she rebuilt with strength and resilience. The thought of Claire flickered again, her gaunt face and desperate words replaying in Martha's mind. For years, she had been fueled by anger and revenge. But now, with nothing left to fight against, Martha wondered if holding on to those last fragments of resentment was worth it. One day, she made a decision. The prison was stark and unwelcoming, its gray walls looming like a fortress. Martha hadn't told anyone she was coming, not her daughters, not her friends. This was something she needed to do alone. She waited in a sterile visiting room, her hands folded neatly on the table. The door on the far side opened, and Claire was let in by a guard. She looked even frailer than before, her hair streaked with gray and her shoulders hunched. When Claire saw Martha, her eyes widened in surprise. She hesitated, as though unsure whether to sit. "Go ahead," Martha said softly, gesturing to the chair across from her. Claire sat down, her hands trembling slightly as she folded them in her lap. "I didn't think I'd see you again," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Martha studied her for a moment before speaking. "I wasn't sure I'd come, but I realized I needed to." Claire looked at her with a mixture of hope and dread. "Why?" Martha took a deep breath. "Because I've spent so much of my life holding on to what you did to me. And for years, I thought revenge would set me free. But it didn't. Not completely." She paused, her gaze steady. "So I'm letting it go. All of it. I came here to tell you that I forgive you. Not for your sake, but for mine." Claire's eyes filled with tears, and she blinked rapidly, as though trying to hold them back. "You forgive me?" she stammered. "Yes," Martha said simply. "You were wrong, and you hurt me more than anyone ever has. But I won't let that define me anymore. And I won't let it define you either." Claire broke down, her composure crumbling as she buried her face in her hands. Martha watched her unmoving, until Claire finally looked up again, her face streaked with tears. "I don't deserve it," Claire whispered. "Maybe not," Martha said, her voice firm, but gentle. "But it's not about what you deserve. It's about what I need to move forward." They sat in silence for a long time, the weight of their shared history hanging between them like a fragile thread. When the guard came to escort Claire back to her cell, she hesitated, turning to Martha one last time. "Thank you," Claire said, her voice breaking. "I don't know if I can ever forgive myself, but thank you." Martha nodded, saying nothing as Claire was led away. As she left the prison, the cold winter air stung Martha's cheeks, but she felt lighter than she had in years. For the first time, she truly believed the chapter was closed. It wasn't about justice anymore. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming her peace, and she had finally found it. Years rolled by, and the memory of Claire became a faint shadow in Martha's life. Her days were now filled with joy, family gatherings, the laughter of her grandchildren, and the simple pleasure of tending to her garden. Yet, every so often, she would find herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. One summer evening, as she watered her flower beds, a letter arrived in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar but precise. Martha hesitated before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. ***. Dear Martha, I've been released. It's strange to think I'm free, though I've carried my prison inside me far longer than these last few years. The world feels different now. Quieter. Emptier. I wanted you to know that I've left Rosewood for good. There's nothing for me there, and I doubt the town would welcome me back. But before I go, I need to say this. Your forgiveness gave me a second chance, not at the life I had, but at being a person worth remembering. I don't expect we'll ever meet again, but I hope you know how deeply your kindness affected me. I've started volunteering at a shelter in a small town up north. For the first time in decades, I feel like I'm doing something good, something real. Thank you, Martha. You gave me a gift I didn't deserve, but one I'm trying to honor every day. I hope you found peace. Claire asterisk, asterisk. Martha read the letter twice, her heart a mix of emotions she couldn't fully name. She didn't cry, nor did she smile. Instead, she folded the letter neatly and placed it in a small box, where she kept things that mattered, not because they were joyful, but because they were significant. That night, Martha sat on her porch, the stars twinkling above her. For the first time, she allowed herself to wonder, not just about Claire's mistakes, but her humanity. Perhaps redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building something better in its shadow. As the years stretched on, Martha rarely thought of Claire, but when she did, it was without anger or pain. Instead, she hoped, quietly and genuinely, that Claire had found the same thing she had spent so long seeking: peace. Because in the end, forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about moving forward, and Martha had finally done just that. Decades passed, and Rosewood transformed around Martha. New families moved in, old neighbors passed on, and the small town grew quieter with time. Martha, now in her late 80s, remained the heart of her family, hosting Sunday dinners and sharing stories with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Her garden, once a symbol of her resilience, became a legacy, tended by younger hands, but still blooming with the care she had given it. One crisp autumn morning, as Martha sat by the window sipping her tea, she noticed an unfamiliar car pull up to her driveway. A young woman stepped out, clutching a small envelope in her hands. She looked nervous, glancing around as if unsure she was in the right place. Martha's curiosity piqued. She set her cup down and opened the door before the woman could knock. "Can I help you?" Martha asked, her voice kind but wary. The woman, no older than 25, hesitated before speaking. "Are you Martha Halstead?" "I am," Martha replied, her brow furrowing slightly. "And you are?" The young woman offered a timid smile. "My name is Evelyn Donovan. Claire Donovan was my mother." Martha's breath caught for a moment. She studied the girl's face. There was a faint resemblance to Claire, but her expression was softer, her demeanor humble. "I see," Martha said carefully. "What brings you here?" Evelyn extended the envelope. "My mother passed away a few months ago. Before she died, she wrote letters for a few people. Yours was one of them. I promised her I'd deliver it." Martha took the envelope, her hands steady despite the rush of emotions swirling within her. "Thank you," she said, nodding toward the porch. "Would you like to come in?" Evelyn shook her head. "I didn't want to intrude. I just wanted to say that my mother spoke about you often. She said you taught her the most important lesson of her life." Martha tilted her head, surprised. "And what was that?" Evelyn's smile was small but genuine. "That it's never too late to try to be better." With that, Evelyn turned and left, leaving Martha alone with the letter. She sat on the porch, the cool breeze rustling the trees around her, and opened it. Asterisk, asterisk. Dear Martha, if you're reading this, it means my time has finally run out. I wanted to write this while I still had the strength to say what I couldn't during our last meeting. You may not believe this, but the years I spent after your forgiveness were the most meaningful of my life. I wasn't a perfect person, not even close, but I tried. I found small ways to make amends, not just for what I did to you, but for the person I had been for so long. I owe you everything, Martha. You could have let hate consume you, and no one would have blamed you. Instead, you chose mercy. That choice saved me, even when I didn't deserve saving. I hope you've found peace, Martha. I hope your family knows how strong and extraordinary you are. And I hope, wherever I go next, that I carry a little of the grace you showed me. With gratitude and humility, Claire ***. Martha folded the letter carefully, her vision blurring as tears welled in her eyes. She sat quietly, letting the weight of Claire's words settle over her. For years, she had wondered if forgiveness could truly change someone. Now, she knew the answer. Martha looked out at her garden, the flowers swaying gently in the breeze. Life had a way of healing wounds, not by erasing them, but by growing something beautiful in their place. She whispered softly to the wind, unsure if anyone could hear. Rest in peace, Claire. And with that, Martha rose from her chair feeling lighter than she had in years, and went back inside to embrace the life she had so carefully and lovingly built. In the final years of her life, Martha lived with a quiet sense of fulfillment. The once turbulent chapters of her past had faded into memories, leaving behind lessons rather than pain. Her family continued to grow, surrounding her with love and laughter. She became the matriarch of not just her own family, but a cherished figure in the Rosewood community, a woman whose strength and grace inspired those who knew her. One golden afternoon, as the leaves began to fall, Martha sat in her garden, her favorite place. The air was crisp, the sun warm on her face. Her great-granddaughter, Lily, played nearby, chasing butterflies and giggling with delight. Lily suddenly stopped and ran over to Martha, holding out a small, vibrant flower she had picked from the edge of the garden. "Great-grandma, look, it's the prettiest one." Martha smiled, taking the flower in her hands. It was a perfect bloom, vivid and full of life. "It is," she said, her voice soft. "Do you know what makes flowers so special, Lily?" The little girl shook her head, her eyes wide with curiosity. "They grow from the earth, no matter how hard or rocky the soil is. They don't forget the stormy days, but they don't hold on to them either. They just keep reaching for the sun." Lily nodded solemnly, as if the wisdom of those words had settled deep within her, even if she didn't fully understand them yet. As the evening light began to fade, Martha leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a moment. She listened to the sounds of life around her, the rustle of leaves, the chirping of birds, and the joyful laughter of her family in the distance. Her heart felt full, her spirit at peace. The garden she had tended for so many years, with its bright colors and strong roots, was a reflection of the life she had cultivated, a life of forgiveness, resilience, and love. When Martha's time came peacefully in her sleep that night, it was as if the earth itself paused to honor her. The garden, vibrant and alive, became a place of remembrance. Her family tended it in her absence, each flower a testament to her strength and kindness. Years later, when Lily had grown and brought her own children to that garden, she told them stories of Martha Halstead, the woman who taught her that even after the harshest storms, life could bloom again. And so, Martha's legacy lived on, not as a tale of vengeance or pain, but as a story of hope, growth, and the enduring power of grace. Years after Martha's passing, her story became a quiet legend in Rosewood. People spoke of her not just as a kind soul, but as a woman who had faced unimaginable trials and emerged stronger, a beacon of resilience and wisdom. Her garden became a community treasure, lovingly maintained by her family and often visited by townsfolk seeking inspiration or a moment of peace. One day, as autumn leaves blanketed the ground, Evelyn Donovan returned to Rosewood. She had spent years searching for a sense of closure, visiting places her mother had spoken of, and learning more about the life Claire had tried to rebuild after prison. Though Claire had never returned to Rosewood, her connection to the town and to Martha remained a defining part of her story. Evelyn stood at the edge of the garden, unsure if she should step inside. It was late afternoon, and the air was thick with the scent of blooming flowers and freshly fallen leaves. She was startled when a soft voice called out behind her, "You must be Evelyn." Evelyn turned to see a woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and a welcoming smile. It was Rachel, one of Martha's daughters. "Yes," Evelyn replied, her voice tentative. "I didn't mean to intrude. I wanted to see this place. My mother spoke of it often." Rachel gestured for Evelyn to join her on a wooden bench near a large oak tree. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of shared history hanging between them. "My mother always believed in forgiveness," Rachel said, breaking the quiet. "It wasn't easy for her, but she thought it was the only way to truly move forward. She forgave your mother because she wanted peace, not just for herself, but for all of us." Evelyn nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "She changed my mother's life. I don't think Claire ever truly knew how to say it, but she admired Martha. She said your mother was stronger than anyone she'd ever met." Rachel smiled faintly. Mom would have appreciated that. But she'd also say it wasn't about strength. It was about choice. Evelyn looked around the garden, her eyes lingering on the flowers, swaying gently in the breeze. "This place feels like her," she said softly. Rachel nodded. "It is. Every bloom, every root. It's a piece of her legacy." Before Evelyn left, Rachel handed her a small clipping of a flower from the garden, wrapped carefully in a damp cloth to keep it alive. "Take this," she said. "Plant it wherever you call home. Let it remind you of how far forgiveness can reach." Evelyn accepted it with tears in her eyes. She left Rosewood that evening, the flower carefully placed on the seat beside her, feeling as though a part of her mother's story had finally come full circle. Back in Rosewood, the Halstead family continued to nurture the garden, adding new flowers each season to symbolize growth and renewal. Over time, it became more than just a family tradition. It became a reminder to the entire community that even the deepest wounds could heal, and that life, no matter how painful, always found a way to bloom. Martha Halstead's legacy endured, not as a tale of revenge or regret, but as a testament to the quiet strength of choosing love and forgiveness over hate. In every petal, in every new bloom, her story lived on, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always a chance to grow toward the light. Many years later, Martha Halstead's garden stood as a living testament to her life and the lessons she had left behind. It had grown beyond a family treasure and into a sanctuary for the town, a quiet, timeless space where people came to reflect, to heal, and to remember the woman who had once turned her pain into peace. One summer day, long after Martha's passing, her great-granddaughter Lily stood in the center of the garden. Now an adult, Lily was tending to the flowers with the same care her great-grandmother had taught her as a child. Her hands moved gently, pruning and watering, while her mind wandered through the stories she had grown up hearing about Martha. She thought about the strength it had taken for Martha to forgive Claire, the courage to rebuild her life, and the wisdom to pass those lessons down to her family. Lily often wondered how one woman could endure so much and still choose grace over vengeance. It was a question she carried with her, especially on days when life felt overwhelming. As she knelt by the roses, a section of the garden that Martha had loved most, Lily noticed a small plaque hidden among the blooms. She hadn't seen it before, though she'd tended this part of the garden many times. Gently brushing the dirt away, she read the words engraved on it. Even in the harshest winters, the seeds of spring await. Choose to grow. Martha Halstead. Lily felt a lump rise in her throat as she traced the words with her fingers. Her great-grandmother's quiet wisdom had always guided the family, but seeing it written here so simply and beautifully made it feel eternal. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden light across the garden. As Lily stood and looked out over the thriving flowers, she felt a deep sense of connection, not just to Martha, but to the legacy she had left for all of them. A legacy not of pain, but of resilience and hope. That evening, Lily gathered her family around the garden for one of their regular gatherings. Children played among the flowers, laughter filled the air, and stories of Martha were shared once again. The garden, alive and vibrant, continued to grow, just as Martha had always intended. And so, Martha Halstead's final lesson became clear. Life is not defined by the trials we face, but by how we choose to overcome them. In her garden, in her family, and in the lives she touched, Martha's spirit endured, a quiet, powerful reminder that love and forgiveness can bloom even in the harshest soil. Her story had come full circle, and her legacy would forever flourish in the hearts of those who walked among her flowers.